Hey guys, this is Hybrid, and today I'm gonna go for another horror stories video like I did earlier in the week. This time I'm gonna do the full 21 horror stories from the 1C animations or entertainment guy I used to react to before. I'll try and do a continuous thing for the full on 1 hour. Anyway, let's go. How I helped my uncle's serious crime and I wrote about it. Guess you would, wouldn't you?
It was 15 years ago. When I was 11 years old, I used to live with my uncle, who was 31 years old at the time. He took me away from my family, telling them how great I would be if I stayed in his farmhouse. Well, he actually had a really nice farmhouse. However, that was totally fake. He also had a big van that he used to kidnap kids in. Usually abducted lost kids, or the kids who were playing in the parks. Yeah, right. He was such a serious kidnapper and murderer. While he was tying up the children after the kidnapping, he ordered me to dig a hole for each one. Of course, I didn't want to do that. I was just horrified and scared of my uncle. One day, I stayed with the kids inside the basement to monitor them. Crying, they were begging to let them go. I could see that some of the kids were almost the same age as my age.
I would have
I
let them
untied
go.
and let them sneak out by the back door so my uncle couldn't see them. He was in the kitchen, sharpening his knives. I returned to the kitchen, acting like nothing happened. But somehow, when he lifted his head, he noticed through the window that they were running away. He got mad, grabbed his gun, and then he ran out the door, trying to shoot them. I immediately ran with him, watching them, and hoping that they could manage it. And all of the kids succeeded to run away, fortunately. I could see that one of them even waved to me to say goodbye. My uncle told me not to worry, and that he'd get more kids the next morning. It seemed like that he was thinking that I was the one who was disappointed about the kids' escape, or whatever. The next morning, I woke up and figured out that he was not there. And all of a sudden, I heard a loud siren, and soon after, the
His
police
uncle.
entered inside the farmhouse. They found me and asked me if I was one of those kids who was kidnapped by him. I couldn't lie to them. I always felt sorry for lots of kids who got kidnapped by him. So I told them that I was his nephew, and they took me with them for questioning. I was crying so badly when I confessed the truth about him to the police. It was the hardest moment that I had to give proof of my uncle's serious crime, because I loved him anyway, whether he's a criminal or not. But I knew this day would come, and actually, I was waiting for it. They didn't believe me at first, but I revealed the location of the holes to them. After digging, the police found bodies under the ground. At that time, my uncle got back to my mother's house, hugged her, and begged to stay for a while. However, the police had already told her about the incident and what had happened to me. So she told him he could stay, but as soon as he got to the bathroom to shower, she alerted Dad and they called the police. My uncle was arrested finally, and the police thanked me and told me that I was such a brave kid. They brought me back to my parents, and I could have a better life with them. My uncle was charged with kidnapping, murdering kids, and even showing me such terrible things that kids should not see. He was condemned to death, and not long after, finally hanged.
Okay, that was story 1. Story 2.
My name is Jonathan.
Alright.
I live in an average apartment. There are main roads via my apartment, but there's also a shortcut too, which makes it faster to go to one of my friends, Nick's house. However, the weird thing was that nobody uses the road. I didn't know until I saw something on it that very day. One day, I went to visit Nick as usual. We played some kinds of games together in his house, having snacks. The outside had become dark, and when I looked at the time, it was almost 10 p.m. Then my mom called me to get back home as soon as possible. She seemed like she got mad, so I packed my stuff quickly. I got out of my friend's house, walked for like
That
2
phase.
minutes, and then I decided to walk through that shortcut lane this time. Because it was completely dark, it gave me a chill, but I was in a rush, so I lighted my phone's flash and walked through the road. It was a straight road, and all the leaves and bushes were on the two sides. And the next moment became the most terrible memory for my entire life. While I was walking alone, my phone's battery suddenly died. Holy crap, I mumbled to myself. But at that moment, I was so freaked out. I made my pace quicker when I heard someone's footsteps. When I looked up, there was a figure in front of me that was almost black and invisible. All lampposts in that road were broken except 2 of them. But those 2 lampposts were flickering continuously, and the figure was slowly walking closer to my side.
To be completely honest, my phone usually dies sometimes,
scars on his face.
but it's because of its being glitchy.
And the blood is falling out of his cut. I tried to ask him if he needed any help, but then he put his hand on top of his head slowly, and he picked it up. I could see his head was dividing from his body, and he was just standing there, holding his head in one hand and looking straight into my eyes. I couldn't even move because I was so terrified at that moment.
I'm pretty sure I would be as well.
All of a sudden, his head was laughing loudly and gave a shriek loudly at the very next. I stepped back, and then he came in front of me again with big strides. This time, I could see those 2 lampposts which were flickering above him all went out. And I don't remember anything after that. The next morning when I woke up, I was in a hospital. It turned out that some guy who was jogging around found me unconscious on that road. My mother was sitting next to me with an anxious look, so I told her my entire experience. When I finished telling her, she seemed a little surprised, and then she patted my back. She told me that there was a man who was murdered and beheaded by some gang members on that road a few years ago.
So
But
it's
the
probably a
police could
ghost.
neither find his head nor the criminal. Since then, lots of people saw the same stuff as me, so they stopped using that road. Even now, whenever I go to my home, I still ignore that frightening road and take another long path. It would always make my heart sink just thinking about that incident itself. My name is Alan, and this happened a year ago. I was at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport and about to check in, going to Dubai. I was standing in the line to check in when I noticed that someone was staring at me. It was a girl. She seemed like an ordinary girl at first, but then I noticed that her eyes were odd. They were open, very wide. She was smiling at me, but her smile was kind of annoying and crooked. I got creeped out, so after I was finished checking in, I quickly went through immigration and headed to the flight gates. Before going to the gates, I stopped at the restroom, and while I was urinating there, I could hear someone faintly whispering outside. I could tell that it was a girl's voice. When I finally walked outside, I encountered the same girl who I had met at the check-in line. She was just standing there. But then, I saw scissors in her pocket. I quickly pushed her, ran away, and hid from her for a while. 30 minutes later, I barely arrived at the gate. And guess who arrived at the gate? Right, the same girl was there again. She was literally stalking me the whole time. Right then, I was terrified. So when we started boarding, I made sure that I didn't make eye contact with her at all. Fortunately, my seat was apart from hers, so at least I felt a little relieved during the flight. But this story didn't end there.
Oh crap, what
When I
happened?
arrived in Dubai, I quickly got out of the airport and headed to the currency exchange counter. While I was exchanging my money, I looked around several times, but there was no sign of her anywhere. I quickly grabbed my money, but the moment I turned around, my heart dropped. The
It was
same
her.
girl whom I met at the airport was there. She was staring at me, holding scissors. But this time, she started twitching bizarrely. Her smile became bigger and even scarier. And she was walking toward me, closer and closer.
Huh.
It was almost 2 a.m., and there was nobody else around in that area. I had no choice but to run, so I dashed quickly away and started searching for a taxi to get to the train station. Just then, I realized that the girl started to speed up and chase after me. Luckily, I narrowly found one taxi, and when I got in, it was a sigh of relief. When I glanced out the back window, the girl was standing there and was staring straight into my eyes. After 2 weeks, I went back to Manila.
Please don't tell me
Of
she's
course,
there again.
I didn't see her anymore after that
Ah,
night.
good.
However, the memory of that girl has been haunting me to this day. I haven't been able to forget her face.
Okay, then this one's called The Encounter.
This is about a dream I had when I was in middle school.
Oh yeah, I've
In my dream,
seen this
I was
one before.
standing in a huge empty space
I'll just watch
with
it.
other people, and I could see the dim light from afar. In fact, behind us, there were some strange people coming after us.
Oh boy, I remember
They
this
were
one.
chasing after us, walking on all
Still
fours,
freaky.
catching and eating people. Each person ran quickly towards the light. I was frightened by those strange beings chasing me from behind, but for some reason I couldn't move my legs to run. However, at one point, I suddenly realized it was a dream and felt at ease. It's a dream. I was standing there, and at that moment, a man in his 30s who was running just stopped next to me. Are you dreaming too? The moment the man spoke to me, I got
creepy.
goosebumps. How could it be possible to meet another person in a dream? While we were standing still looking at each other, the people behind us suddenly attacked us. At that moment, I woke up screaming. In my whole 26 years of existence,
I think I'm just gonna
I
skip
only
these.
have one dream that I vividly remember. It's about a nightmare that I had when I was in the 8th grade.
There's just the
Although I
same.
can't remember the whole story, the last moment still gives me a chill to this day. So I was being chased by
Yeah, it's the same.
It's just a coincidence, but who knows? This story is about the creepiest dream I've ever had. In my dream, I was in middle school and inside of a classroom. All of a sudden,
Yeah, I remember this.
towards us from the opposite direction. Well, I can see that towards us from the north was the moment I realized that I was dreaming. Hey, isn't this a dream? It's just a dream. When I asked them while laughing, they all turned around and looked at me with empty eyes, and then I couldn't believe what I heard. You might be, but we are not. That was the last memory.
True horror story, but going creepy. Okay.
A few years ago, my mom, my younger sister, and I went out for dinner at a local restaurant one night. As we were walking on the sidewalk towards the restaurant, I noticed a man walking towards us from the opposite direction. Well, I can say that this was normal, but there was sort of a creepy vibe about him. He looked like he was in his mid-50s. He was tall and had a dirty beard. He was also bald. Anyway, we walked inside the restaurant, and the waiter led us to a table. Then, a few minutes later, the same man from the sidewalk walked in and sat at a table close to ours, which was so uncomfortable.
He's stalking
I
you.
thought this was weird, but when our meals came out, I just swept away any doubts about him. While we were eating, I noticed that he was staring at me the whole time. I tried to ignore him. When my sister and I were almost finished eating, the waiter came up to us and said to my mom, "Ma'am, don't worry, your bill has been paid." My mom was confused and asked him what he meant, and he said that the man who was sitting next to our table had offered to pay the bill for us. Although this was a cheap restaurant, my mom refused the offer and explained that she was creeped out by that man. The waiter soon nodded and went to go get our
I'm pretty
bill.
sure I would be as well.
When he left, The man slowly walked towards us, opened a strange duffel bag he was carrying, and pulled out 2 stuffed animals. The shapes of the stuffed animals were totally crushed, and I didn't realize that it was an animal at first. It was the most disgusting thing that I've ever seen in my life. My heart started beating faster when he came over to our table and gave the stuffed animals to me and my sister. Being a 5-year-old girl, my sister was going to say yes, but my mom and I both interrupted and refused. Then the man didn't say a word. He walked back to his table and sat down. After the waiter came back with our bill, my mom explained what just happened. The waiter said that the man paid for his meal, so it wasn't possible to kick him out. However, the waiter said that he would follow us out of the restaurant to make sure everything was okay. Later that night, when we came back home,
I guess he
tried to
stalked
fall
you home.
asleep, but it was hard to close my eyes because I was still feeling uncomfortable. I just laid there, and when I looked at the clock, it was around 2 a.m. All of a sudden, I heard someone walking outside my window. It was the fall season, so all the dead leaves would make loud crunching sounds whenever someone walked on them. At first, I assumed that it might have been some type of animal. However, I abruptly remembered the man from the restaurant and began to feel scared. The sound of footsteps was getting closer, and I shut my eyes as tight as I possibly could. Knock, knock, knock. I heard someone knock on my window 3 times. Slowly, I froze. I knew that it was a red flag and that I shouldn't open my eyes. But I opened my eyes cautiously. Then my heart dropped. The man at the restaurant was peeking through my window. With his glaring eyes, his eyes were fixed on me and looked me up and down.
Oh no.
I couldn't scream at all. I just lay there, praying that it must be a dream. However, he didn't do any harm to me. He just stood there watching me and then walked away after a while. I didn't get any sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I explained to my mom what happened yesterday.
Yeah,
and she
explain
called
it.
the police right away. However, although the police searched all over the area, they couldn't find him. They didn't know who that creeper was or what he wanted. But I'll never forget that night.
My name is Eric. I'm 31 years old, as well as a single dad living in a 1-story house with my son, named Alex. It all started the night before Christmas, when Alex was 5 years old. Alex was so excited, so we decided to go for a walk around our town. We were walking down our road, listening to the sound of carolers in the distance. That led us all the way down to the main street. When we came face to face with the 3 old women singing, I took out my phone, trying to record a story for my Instagram, just like other people around us. When I looked down, I saw my son covering his ears. I stopped recording, crouched down, and asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the middle woman of the 3 carolers was giving my son an evil grin with a large, creepy smile. She seemed a little bit weird. Well, it was a chilly December night, so I decided we would head back anyway. When we reached home, my son looked relieved. So I thought he just wanted to go watch TV and catch up on his episode he thought that he might miss. Later, as I was cooking in the kitchen, I took a glance at my son, and I could see that he looked absolutely terrified. He was sitting straight up on the couch, which faced the TV. There was a large window next to the couch that had the curtains slightly open. Then he sprinted up quickly, ran to me, and just hugged my leg. "Daddy, she's here," he told me with a shivering voice. And I replied, "Who?" He exclaimed back, "The middle woman we saw when we watched the caroling."
She followed you.
I quickly looked at the window, and there really was that old lady we saw not too long ago. I closed my eyes for about 1 second, and when I opened my eyes again, she completely vanished. Being freaked out, I called 911 naturally, telling them about what had just happened. There were 3 cops that showed up, so I explained the incident to them again, and one of the cops showed me a photograph that looked kind of old to me. She was in there. Then she pointed to that old lady, asking if this was her, and I answered yes. She started laughing. My son looked confused until I asked why she was laughing. She stopped and gave us a kind of serious look this time, but was still smiling. Then she said, "Hey, you know what? I know this is weird, but this woman died 3 years ago, on this exact same day." My heart dropped. That's when my son looked terrified too. I tried to calm him down, but I couldn't believe what was going on. The other 2 cops came inside and said they found no trace of anything while searching. It made no sense. When the cops had left our house, I put my son into his bed and went to my room. I turned the light on my nightstand that was close to the side, grabbed my phone, and decided to check Instagram, thinking that if I could find anything, I would just call the cops back. I opened my story, and to my surprise, I couldn't find that old lady in there. I checked another story, and then checked another again. But in fact, it was just 2 women there singing. Feeling mixed emotions like scared, mad, and even more, stupid, I started checking some other people's stories from around my neighborhood. And still, she wasn't there. But all of a sudden, I realized something. I was checking some story feeds, and I ran into one story of some woman who was standing doing caroling. Where my son and I should have been standing was replaced by nothing. It was like we weren't even there from the beginning. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. I put a hand over my mouth and couldn't say anything. That night, that Christmas day became the most terrible moment for us.
Got like
I'm 33
30
now,
minutes left.
and my son is now 7 years old. But even if everybody thinks that it doesn't sound true at all, we both still remember it like it was yesterday.
Okay, what happened?
My name is Samantha. I'm just a regular woman with a husband and 2 kids. I met my husband at the high school we both attended, and we got married after graduation. I got pregnant shortly after, and had to get a cesarean section during my delivery. Luckily, both babies and I are in good health. We have been living a happy life. However, something creepy happened to me a few days ago. Well, Kate became crazy. Kate was one of my best friends since high school, and I've always known her to be a nice, shy, and pretty quiet girl.
What happened?
A few weeks ago, we had our school reunion. I met my classmates again after about 10 years since graduation. Everything went fine, and we had a good time until Kate joined us. When she came in, she looked like she hadn't slept in several weeks and smelled really bad. Everyone just stood there, frozen, until Kate took out a knife from her pocket. Everyone screamed, and then she ran towards my direction. "Samantha, you'll die for what you did to me." All of a sudden, the police entered through the big glass sliding door and jumped on Kate. The chills hit me as she growled like a dog. Then the police said that she had some kind of mental problem and just escaped from a mental asylum a few hours ago. I had
what
no
does she
idea
blame?
what was wrong with her, and I was just wondering what had happened to her. And I felt really sorry for her because she had changed so much. A few days later, someone called me on my phone. It was an old lady claiming that she was a nurse at the local mental asylum. She wanted to talk to me about something related to Kate. Since I had nothing to do, I decided to visit the asylum. As soon as I got there, the old lady greeted me, and she guided me into a room divided by a window, like the meeting rooms in jails. On the other side, there she was, Kate. She was tied up to a chair.
Makes sense.
I could hear her continuously mumble. Then the old woman walked in and said, "He is here, sweetie." As Kate slowly looked up and into my eyes, she started to scream at me with wide open and bloody big eyes.
Jesus Christ.
"They are mine. You stole them. You must suffer for it." I didn't understand what was happening. What was Kate talking about? Then the old lady returned next to me and said, "Miss Samantha, you have a husband and 2 kids, right?" I nodded. She sighed and then whispered, "Well, I have to say this. One of them is not yours." My heart sank
What?
as she continued.
Was she
"You said
physically
that you
gave
had a
birth?
cesarean section before, but half of your memory is not true. One boy is her kid. To be more specific, he's Kate and your husband's son. Just after she gave birth, she got a huge shock and threw her baby to the ground, which eventually made the workers in the hospital suspect that she was not stable. That's why she has been in this room since that very day, except for a few days ago, when she escaped to the reunion, back to the kids. Since Kate was locked in this place, your husband took the kid. He fooled you to believe that both are your kids. Kate finally noticed that her baby was gone, so she escaped from him to find you and your husband." I just stood there in a state of shock, just staring at her empty eyes. My husband was a kind person, but now I finally realized he lied to me and even cheated on me with my ex-best friend. I returned to my home, and since then I haven't told anyone about this yet. Well, to be more specific, I couldn't. Both my kids still believe that I'm their real mom. If I reveal to my husband the fact that I know all of this, my family will be ruined. So, what should I do?
Okay. I lost track
This
on how many
happened
were
when I
on.
was around 7 years old. My parents have been divorced since I was 4, and I stayed with my mom. 3 years later, when my mom got married again, we moved out of our small apartment and rented a bigger one. It was pretty nice. It had a huge living room that was connected to a kitchen with no doors, so I could see the inside of the kitchen while I was sitting in the living room. As we were about to spend our first night in the new apartment, I decided to stay in the living room alone and watch some TV before going to bed. 1 or 2 hours later, I finally got tired and began dozing off. However, as soon as I began to fall asleep, I started hearing noises coming from the kitchen. It sounded as if the cabinets were opening, the plates were being moved around, and knives were being sharpened. At first, I thought that my mom was in the kitchen, but when I opened my eyes and turned around, there was no one there. I even got up and went to the kitchen, and as I turned on the lights, everything was in its place. So I tried going back to sleep. But after all that, I kept waking up due to several nightmares. Sometimes I would even beg my stepdad to stay with me until I fell asleep, but he didn't hear any noises coming from the kitchen and didn't take me too seriously. Well, this went on until we started smelling something weird inside the living room. It wasn't as bad at first, but as the days went by, the stench got worse.
Wait,
It smelled
was it
as
a corpse?
if something was rotting. We turned the whole house upside down trying to find the source of it, until we realized it was coming from the wall. We figured that a rat or something died inside the wall, so we hired someone to get that thing out of there. But what the guy told us was shocking. There was no space in the wall. It was all brick. Furthermore, the only thing that was behind the wall was the outside. At that moment, my parents remembered the noises I heard and the nightmares. They asked a priest to come visit us and pray for the house. So when he arrived at our house, he prayed and sprayed some holy water around, but it didn't seem to do anything. A few weeks later, my mom went into labor and had my baby brother. He would cry so
You shouldn't have
much in
tapped
his
him
sleep
there.
that his face would often turn blue and red. Crying at night is usually common behavior for babies, but this was more extreme. My parents were both sleep deprived, and the living room still reeked of something rotten, like a dead body. So I had to sleep in my stepdad's office room. We couldn't stand being there anymore, so the next day we asked a psychic for help. When she came into our house, she walked around with one of those aroma sticks. The smoke was grayish-white as she walked from room to room, but as soon as she entered the living room, it turned black. She then started reading some prayers and spells and told us that someone was killed in this apartment. She also said that the ghosts were feeling uncomfortable with our presence, and they especially didn't like kids. Then she pointed at me and my baby brother. After she left our home, we were all terrified. So my parents called the person who we rented the apartment from and confronted him about what we just learned. To our surprise, he confessed that it was true and apologized for giving us that haunted
Why would
apartment for a
anyone
very
want to give
cheap
a
price.
haunted apartment?
After that, we moved out, and the paranormal activity was not experienced again. However, this memory gives me chills up to this day.
Ghost friend. Okay, here we go.
It happened a few years ago. I was hanging out at the local mall with a couple of my friends, just chatting, as usual. All my friends had social media accounts, like Facebook or Instagram,
No one
and they
uses
would focus
Facebook.
on it sometimes when we were goofing around together. Drake, one of my friends, was saying that he met a girl from Facebook. He also told us that he really liked her, and that he was going out with the girl that night. We joked with him that he was going to be going out with some 40-year-old man. Like those kind of jokes, you know. A couple of hours later, we had to go back home, so we all left the mall. When I got back home, I went inside my room to watch some TV.
Okay.
It was almost midnight when I got a text from my friend saying, "Hey, just finished the date." So I texted back, "Was he pretty?" He replied, "Very funny. Jokes aside, my car broke down and I need you to pick me up." Then he sent me an address. Well, I'm not the kind of person who ignores when my friend needs a hand. So I asked my parents if I could take the car, and they said yes. I grabbed my phone and texted again, "On my way." Soon I got to the address he sent me and parked in the driveway. While I was going up the stairs, I kind of had a creepy feeling, as if I was being watched. Anyway, I rang the doorbell and heard someone say, "Come in." At first, I didn't recognize the voice. It was neither my friend's voice nor a female voice, so I just figured that it might be the girl's dad. Well, I was a bit surprised that the door was already open. But anyway, I walked in, and when I closed the door behind me, I saw this man watching TV with the girl and my friend.
Flies.
I said, "Hey, Drake." However, for some reason, he didn't respond. I had a strange feeling, so I slowly walked up to Drake. And I would never forget what I saw at that
He
moment.
died.
The girl and my friend Drake were stabbed, and they were already dead. They were put in a position in a way that it looked like they were sitting. So I thought they were just watching TV like that. I looked over at the man watching TV, and I saw that he was holding a bloody knife in one hand, and my friend's phone in his other hand. He was smiling. The man turned his head toward me, stood up and said, "Hello, young man. It's your turn." I tried to run out of the door, but because he was laughing so loudly, I was terrified, and I couldn't move. But there was no choice. When he approached me, I abruptly kicked him, knocked him down, and managed to run outside.
Wish you on the way.
Fortunately, he didn't chase after me, but I didn't care. I just got in my car and drove off straight to my home. As soon as I got home, I woke my parents and told them about what had happened. And of course, they contacted the police. The police arrived pretty fast and raided the house, but didn't find my friend, the girl, or even the man. And to this day, they still haven't found any clues.
Jeez.
Now I'm grown up and I'm living on my own with my wife and newborn daughter. I always think about what would have happened to me if I was unable to run away that day. And my friend Drake, his face keeps coming up in my mind all the time since then.
Yeah, I
This
think my phone
happened
has
when
enough
I
power
was on
for
my
these.
way to my grandmother's house. On that
Isn't
day,
I'll just
I tried to
finish
catch the jeepney
this
because the
and
other buses
record
were
the other
already
one,
full
record
at
the next
12
ones.
a.m. I finally found a jeepney, and there were only a few people inside. There was a driver, a money collector who was hanging onto the outside of the vehicle, 2 girls, a few guys, and an old woman. We were on the road when we passed by a mental hospital. Then a lady, with a hospital gown on, was standing there, pointing her finger out, which meant she wanted a ride. She was bald and her face was pale white. The jeepney stopped next to her, and the inside of the car went silent. The streets were covered in fog and darkness, and the light of the jeepney was the only light source. At the time, I was texting my grandma and said that I was going to be late while glancing at the lady. However, before she stepped on the stairs of the jeepney, the driver abruptly jammed the accelerator and left her behind. I was confused. It seemed like everyone was too. When we looked over at the driver, he seemed to be so scared, but we didn't know the reason why. I asked him why he left the lady behind, and he replied with a trembling voice. He said, "She's not just a lady, ma'am." At that point, the driver looked at the rearview mirror, shut his mouth, and then increased the speed. When I followed his eyes towards the mirror, I saw it. The lady was running towards the jeepney with a weird pose and an abnormal speed. She was so fast that I couldn't see her face clearly, but her dress was visible. It was covered with blood.
Crap.
The collector, who was hanging outside, jumped inside and then yelled to the driver, "Faster! She's getting closer!" People inside of the jeepney were getting scared. I was the closest to the door, and out of nowhere saw the lady jump on the vehicle. She then slowly hung onto the door of the jeepney, and finally she lifted her face. She had bruises all over her face, and she was smiling at us with sharp teeth and big, deep black eyes. My heart almost stopped, and everybody in the jeepney screamed. I quickly hit her with my bag, and she tumbled down from the jeepney. However, the moment she got off, I saw her standing. She looked at me and then laughed like a demon. Not long after, the jeepney finally reached the station. Everyone hurried off the car. I got off and handed my payment to the guy. Then I went to the 7-Eleven nearby and bought some snacks to ease my nerves. I was at the counter thinking about what just happened, and then the cashier suddenly asked me, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I'll just say that I saw a crazy lady on the road when we were riding on the jeepney," I said, and then I couldn't believe his response. "I know her. She had cancer, and the moment she lost all of her hair, she went crazy, laughing all the time, hurting herself, and even threatening to kill people. That's why her family eventually moved her out to the mental hospital. But after a week, she tried to escape, got hit by a jeepney, and died," he said. I was shocked, and goosebumps were all over my body. I asked the cashier if he still remembered the plate number of the jeepney. "Well, for my privacy, I'm not going to mention the number. but after he told me, I thanked him, got my change, and looked for the jeepney I was on. The moment I found the jeepney again, I froze. The jeepney that I rode was the same one that hit and killed the lady. This happened when I was in middle school. My school was kind of old building, and some places were almost torn out. The school had 3 main bathrooms. 2 were pretty maintained, but the last one was different. It was separated from most of the other buildings. The floor was always dirty, and there were 6 stalls, but only 3 had doors, and even those doors were all broken up. I hated ever going there. Well, not just me. All the girls hated that gross place. Anyway, one day, while I was in the classroom chattering with my friends, I had to use the bathroom so bad. Unfortunately, that gross bathroom was the closest, and furthermore, I didn't want to try my luck to endure it. So I went inside, and I could say that it was the grossest smell I've ever smelled. I entered the last stall, which was much cleaner than the others in a hurry, and had to keep my pants not touching the floor. Afterward, I went to the sink to wash my hands. The inside of the bathroom was silent, and all I could hear was the sound of water running from the faucet.
So normal
Then
so far.
I heard a tapping sound. I turned off the tap and glanced up at the mirror, but I couldn't see anything because the surface of the mirror was so dirty. So I looked down, washed my hands, and started to dry them until I heard a tapping noise again. I grabbed some paper towel and slowly wiped off the mirror, and at that moment, I finally saw it. It was visible. There was a hand that was out of one of the restroom stalls, tapping on the surface of the door. Those fingers were pale white and skinny as a bone. However, when I quickly turned around, the fingers were vanished. I couldn't believe what I'd seen, so I just thought myself that let's just wash it and leave it, as I turned around and stood in front of the mirror. Then I saw my reflection very clearly. That was the worst part in my story. I was smiling at me. The reflection of me was literally smiling with mouth wide open. I couldn't move. I just glanced at the mirror and froze in fear, and then I heard the tapping noise again. To my surprise, when I looked closely at the mirror, I noticed that my reflection was tapping on the mirror to get my attention, and on the other hand, it was beckoning to me. I screamed in fear, threw my paper towel, and ran away from the bathroom. As I came back to the classroom, I told my friends what I'd seen, but they never believed me. After that day, I never went into that bathroom again. To this day, I don't want to know what I saw in there, and I'm still a bit paranoid about mirrors. Well, I'll never forget what I saw for the rest of my life. This is a story about a dream. There was a person who was preparing for a trip. After he bought a plane ticket, he waited a few days with excitement and finally fell asleep a day before the trip. And he had a weird dream. He saw a woman in his dream wearing a colorful jacket. Her eyes and mouth were both wide open. Then she suddenly shook her body and started to dance like a mad person. Being surprised, he finally woke up. He checked the time and then he realized that the boarding time had already passed. All of a sudden, he received a phone call from his mother while he was thinking about what he should do next. As soon as he answered the phone, he heard his mother's anxious voice. She was worried about him. Confused, he turned on the television and the news made his heart drop. The plane that he was supposed to be on had crashed. Furthermore, the
Okay.
airline's logo looked very familiar to him.
Same colors.
I was bullied when I was in high school. One day, I fell asleep while in class, and when I opened my eyes, it was already dark outside. During the class, no one bothered to wake me up, so I had to leave the classroom alone. The dark hallway was scary, and tears were rolling down my face. I was really sad, realizing that I was being bullied. Anyway, I was passing by a full-length mirror in the middle of the school stairs. Then, as I was walking downstairs with my cell phone's flashlight, I saw myself in the mirror by accident, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it for a while. I was not reflected on the mirror. Being confused, I looked in the mirror straight ahead this time, but still, I couldn't see myself. Staring in the mirror for a few more minutes, I then screamed and ran out of the school. Come to think of it now, I think they didn't see me in the classroom that day.
So he probably died
My
from
name is Arnie.
suicide. And
A couple of years ago in the summer,
bullying.
we moved into a new house that was much bigger than our old house. The inside of the house was very huge. Everybody was satisfied with the house. But for some reason, I couldn't get rid of the unnerving feeling. One night, I stayed up late, alone, watching some scary movies on my phone. All of a sudden, I heard what sounded like someone singing. At first, I thought maybe I was just paranoid, or it was coming from the movie I was watching. However, it kept going for like 15 minutes,
Include the previous
even though
video.
I turned down the volume. I looked at my watch and it was almost 3 a.m. It sounded like a woman, and her voice would get very close to my room. Then it would slowly move through our halls. And then, after a few minutes, it vanished. I was creeped out, but I eventually went back to bed because nothing I could do about it. When I woke up in the morning, I asked my mother and sister if they had heard someone singing last night. They just shook their heads, and they even asked me if I was okay. I was puzzled by this. So the next night, I decided to stay up to see if the woman would sing again. Later that night, I was almost falling asleep, but then I heard it again. The time was exactly 3 a.m. I was so scared, too scared to go see who or what it was. I was pretty sure that I was the only one who was awake in the house. So I went out into the hallway quietly, and when I turned my head toward the hallway, I froze in fear. There was a woman who
It's the
I've never
girl from
seen
the
before,
ring.
standing at the end of the long hallway and staring at me with a blank look. She was wearing a white dress, had long, straight black hair, and was singing that same bone-chilling song that I heard when I was in my room. I wanted to run back to my bed, but I couldn't move my legs for some reason. Then, the woman started slowly moving toward me. And what I noticed at that moment still gives me a chill to this day. She wasn't walking, but I could say that she was rather hovering a couple inches off the ground. As she was coming closer and closer, I could see that her mouth was almost ripping, and that was the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. I eventually passed out, and when I woke up in a panic, it was 3:30 a.m. I looked around the dark hallway, but she wasn't there anymore. Well, we still live in that house, and I've heard that dreaded singing from that woman moving throughout my house about twice a month. I told my friends about it, but no one ever believed me. I just hope that no one else has to experience this terrifying thing.
This happened when I was around 6 years old.
10 minutes left, okay.
I was with my mom on the bus. We were on our way to my grandmother's house. The bus was pretty quiet and empty. but there was an old man sitting in front of me. The bus soon reached a bus stop, and a few passengers got on. However, suddenly, the old man who was sitting in front of me started screaming out of nowhere and then fell flat on his face. All of the people on the bus were concerned, and eventually, the bus driver stopped the bus and called the police and an ambulance. They came shortly after. A moment later, something unbelievable happened. The police arrested a man who was on the bus. To my surprise, he turned out to be a serial killer who was wanted for a very long time. The old man who had fallen started screaming because he found a woman's head inside of the killer's bag. This happened during finals week. My friend and I got hungry while studying late at night, so we decided to go to a restaurant nearby that was open late at night. We ordered food and sat near the window. My friend was looking out the window while she was talking to me, and then she suddenly stopped. She didn't say anything, but pointed at the window with a trembling finger. "What?" I asked, as I turned my head towards the window. And as soon as I did, my eyes focused on a couple of people outside. I instantly froze.
Yep.
Somehow.
Oh, hell no. If I ever saw myself, I'd be surprised if it was Nightmare Fuel Me or something. I'd jump the hell out of a window and hope I don't have to see them. If it's... There's also a thing, like, if I imagine how a gender bend me would act. Because I've seen a lot of things gender bend into a gender swap recently. Don't know why. I think I'd probably be the same.
My friend and I were standing outside staring at us. They smiled at us for a while, and then they blended in and disappeared with the rest of the people outside. Our food came out, and my friend and I couldn't eat at all. We eventually rushed out of the restaurant. Who were those two people we saw that day, and why did they look exactly like us? This happened to me when I was young. One day, I was home alone, and I was running the washing machine in the laundry room. When the first load was done, I took out all the laundry. I turned around, and then I saw a lady standing right in front of me. She was a middle-aged woman, and she was smiling at me. I almost fainted at that moment, thinking that it must have been my imagination. But unfortunately, the lady was still standing there. For some reason, I couldn't move my body. I was about to cry. Then the lady suddenly started running around the living room and was laughing out loud. It turned out that my home security system wasn't properly locked, so the woman managed to sneak inside. The woman was caught by a security guard who came to our house after hearing the security alarm go off. She was later arrested by the police. Later on, the investigation confirmed that the woman was not caught on the elevator security camera, which meant that the woman walked up the stairs all the way to the 15th floor, opening each door one by one to see if any were open.
When I was 6 years old, I went shopping for clothes with my dad.
Type of horror
I had a good time with him, and everything was fine until I noticed that a man was staring at me.
Here we go.
He was a tall, white, and kind of weird-looking dude who was probably around in his 30s.
But
Then
why
he started
call it
smiling at
the
me more
red
creepily.
screen?
My head kept saying, "What's wrong with that man?" I told my dad right away, but he reassured me that it wasn't a big deal. So I shrugged it off and soon forgot about it. A few minutes later, we were at the checkout area, and I heard the voice of someone whispering.
Yeah, it's the same guy.
I turned my head back and I saw the same man that I'd seen before. He was smiling again and tossed me a candy. I usually don't accept stuff from strangers because my dad won't let me. But this time, my dad wasn't looking at me, so I took it. When we got home, I went up to my room,
Yeah,
sat
it's
down,
not a
and
normal
opened the
candy.
candy wrapper. However, there was a folded note instead of candy. It said, "Careful." Being a young and careless kid, I just thought it was some kind of prank and ignored it. A few weeks later, it was the holidays, so my mom went to a party and my dad was busy with work. I had to stay home alone, but that also meant I could do whatever I wanted to. So I was watching YouTube eating my snacks until about 9 p.m. I started to feel tired watching YouTube, and then I heard some noises outside. I got scared, so I took my phone and ran to my parents' room, as it was the safest room in my house. I quickly locked the door. My parents' room had a monitor where I could check the security cameras, so I tried to look who was outside. However, I could only see red on the screen. I thought it was strange, so I quickly rewound for about 5 minutes. And what I saw was shocking. It was that man who I'd seen at the shopping mall. He was just standing there, holding a can of spray paint for a minute or so.
Oh,
Then he suddenly started spraying all the cameras.
that's what it's called.
Just then, I heard small knocking noises. Hiding in my parents' closet, I tried to call my parents, but no one answered. Then I called the police, thinking that it might be my last chance, and explained to them my current situation completely. Fortunately, the police arrived in just 5 minutes. They searched our whole house, and they finally found him hiding in the attic. After they arrested and investigated him, it turned out that the man had trailed me that day when I got the candy from him. He already knew where I lived, so he made a plan to steal some valuables from our house. They also found apparent evidence that he was even going to try to do some bad things to me. Well, I'm just glad I survived. However, to this day, it's agonizing just recalling the moment when I saw his face through the camera. When I was about 16, I lived in a small town. We had this abandoned house in my neighborhood. It was huge, almost big enough to call it a mansion, but it had been an empty house for a while. One day, on the first day of summer vacation, I suggested investigating inside of that house. All of my friends agreed.
Okay,
A few
what's
days
gonna
later,
happen?
around 7:30 p.m., we snuck into the house. The inside of the house had been burnt pretty badly, which we thought was the reason why the house was abandoned. Everything was kind of cool, but old and countrified. We started to check all of the upstairs and downstairs of the house, even the basement. Just at that moment, I saw something darting across the room. I started getting nervous, but then I thought to myself,
What's gonna
it
happen?
might be a squirrel or a raccoon, and brushed away my doubts. Then I went to the second floor, and my friends followed me. I opened the door, and there was a human-sized teddy bear sitting in the desk chair, facing us. We were spooked for a moment, but it didn't stop us from exploring further. We went to the third floor, and while we were searching around and taking some stuff, someone told us to look up. When we looked toward the wall, we could see the writing, "Get out." However, we all laughed. We talked about how brave we were, and then turned around to head back downstairs. All of a sudden, one of my friends, Jay, whispered that he saw something moving behind me. I turned around with my flashlight, but nothing was there. Feeling weird, we went down to the second floor again. Then, when we looked into the second floor room, I swear to God, the teddy bear was gone. Everybody in the house said nothing at all. We all agreed that we should leave this house as soon as possible.
Yeah,
There was a
probably
door
best.
which was connected to the kitchen, so we approached the kitchen. But just at that moment, one of my friends gasped. Everybody slowly turned around, and the teddy bear was there. It was sitting at the dinner table looking towards us, and when we raised our heads upwards, we could see the writing on the walls. "Get out." Getting caught or not, I wanted to leave. I wanted to be out of there.
Same
I
here, I
ran
would
out
have.
of the kitchen, but I couldn't take one step further. There was a man who was standing there. He was blocking our way through the door. He was holding a knife. He seemed like he was almost in his mid-40s. We just stood there, staring at him, without saying anything or screaming. The man was blocking our way, and he took a step forward,
Kick him.
staring at us with a big, wide smile.
Someone kick him.
Then one of my fearless friends that found an old hockey stick from one of the rooms stepped in front of me and shouted to him not to come any closer. The man didn't say anything. He took a couple of steps back and slowly crawled into a big hole behind a seat chair in the corner of the room. We couldn't believe what we had just seen. Without any hesitation, we ran for our lives after he disappeared. As soon as we managed to get out, everyone started to run away in a hurry. As I was following them, I turned around and I saw it. The man stood in the window and waved to us, smiling peacefully, like nothing had ever happened. When we finally reached a safe place, far away from that house, we all just stood there thinking that it was the most horrible nightmare we had ever experienced. After that night, I never sneak into houses, especially any abandoned houses.
Okay, that was, that was that video. If you guys enjoyed this, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next video.